Okay, let's start. That clock is actually 1 minute late. So good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Luis Zingales. I'm the faculty director of the Stigler Center. And we're happy today to have Roselyne Renel for a 3-day mini course on managing lending risk. Before introducing Roselyne, let me start by noticing a few things. So I'm going to the details. The first one is that this is live stream and on record, so please silence your phone and be careful of what you say. As usual, the views expressed by our guests are their own, not those of the Stigler Center or the University of Chicago. As you may know, the Stigler Center promotes and diffuses research on regulatory capture and the various distortions that special interest groups impose on capitalism. We have many initiatives, including the Capitalism podcast that I co-host with Kate Warburg, and the Pro Market blog, so please check them out. We are now having a very exciting fall program, including November 8th, there will be Bill Browder, and we'll discuss how Putin and the Russian oligarchs are corrupting the world. Bill Browder received a Interpol red notice from Putin, so he's actually he's sort of escaping from Putin. So it's quite an interesting character. Back to this afternoon. I think we look forward to hearing from Roselyne's insights on lending risk in emerging markets. Roselyne has a 25 years experience in financial services, in particular in being a chief credit officer. She was for 17 years at Deutsche Bank, and she just stepped down from Standard Chartered. And the reason why she's here is because she's in a gardening leave to go to another important institution, not to be named yet. And now she had the luck to experience all the major financial crises of the last 25 years. So she started with the one in East Asia in '97, then got the Russian one in '98, the dot-com bubble, and last but not least, of course, the global financial crisis. And I think that she's going to discuss with us how to actually take this risk in consideration in lending. And what is interesting, she's really a cosmopolitan woman because she was born in Mauritius, she's a French nationality, and now she lives in London. So please welcome Roselyne.
I'm going to check if this thing is working. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to skip my about me since Luigi has talked about it. And what I want to say first of all is that when we talk about risk, obviously the bankers have had quite a bit of backlash in recent years, and I think there's a lot of people who say, are banks really willing to take risk? Are they willing to take risk, and so on? The thing that we need to remember is that banks are in the business of taking risk. Risk management is the business of taking risk. And maybe, I don't know to all your level of understanding and knowledge, but what I'm going to say is that just to think about something once as we go through those examples, is that in banking there are 3 lines of defense. One, the first line of defense, as is referred to, you will see this in the press and when people talk about cases. The first line of defense is the front office, so the guys who are talking to the clients, who are looking at the transactions and trying to generate some deals. The second line of defense is the risk function, who analyzes, evaluates, eventually approves the transaction, but provides oversight of the risk. And the third line of defense is usually the internal audit guys who come and audit all of us. Okay. So think about this as we talk about the various cases. Okay. So risk cannot be eliminated, but risk can be mitigated and is often initially underestimated. And the cases that we're going to talk about, obviously, we've got the benefit of hindsight in terms of what happened and what maybe was missed. but hopefully it will give you an idea of what are things that maybe people did not think about, but should have actually, was quite obvious that should have been looked at in a little bit of more detail. In my mind, when we think about risk and taking risk, the key issue is the strength of analysis, is to look at evidence, but essentially risk is not science, it's going to be judgment. Okay, so the analysis and looking at what you have with you, in front of you, looking for the non-obvious, and importantly to be compensated for the risk that you are taking, and ensuring that a diversified portfolio to mitigate risk and concentration is very important. But the key here is that when you think about risk management, and this is why I've been, as Luigi said, I'm a career risk officer for 25 years. I've never been keen on moving to the first line, because I think that risk is really diverse, it's very interesting, it's very, every day you get faced with something different, but it's judgment. There's no science. You really need to think about what you have in front of you and make a decision. The case studies that we're going to look at are all extreme examples of what can go wrong. I think it would have been a little bit boring if I showed you the sort of like, normal stuff. However, they are all true. I have not used names of counterparties that are clients, customers that are that I'm using in these cases, but I will name them where I can. Obviously, everything that is here is in the public domain. Some of the stuff I will talk about, I've gathered through my own private work with the client. So I would ask you please to treat it in that, with that in mind, okay? What will happen? So when you see the crisis, I mean, you guys, given your age, you would have probably only remembered the global financial crisis and not the one before that. But there will be another crisis after that global financial crisis, which is obviously don't know when. And what is for sure is that problems will happen. And what is critical is when you look at past cases when things have gone wrong, is to learn from them and basically think about how you react to problems in the future once you have learned from what happened in the past. There was, as I said at the beginning, quite a bit of backlash on bankers and how they were reckless and how they lost a lot of money. I don't believe fundamentally that there's any bankers out there who actually does a transaction with the intention of losing money, but the losses happen. And each situation in my mind needs to be looked at bottom up, which is know your client, importance of fundamental thorough credit analysis must not be underestimated. So if I think about the start of my career 25 years ago, to be a credit analyst was, maybe a good job to start off with, but everybody who went into credit wanted to go in front of this. It is reversed now. Credit people or risk people get paid as much as people who go into the front of this, because it's the realization of how important risk is, not just from the second line, but also from the first line, is actually critical. Knowing your data, understanding the data is absolutely vital, and well-structured, strong documentation, and up-to-date valuations, as we will see in the cases, are actually very, very critical. And the top-down approach, to me, is, in my mind, my personal view, is the what-if scenario analysis. Too many times people have done transactions where you looked at the best case and you looked at just what is in front of you, but not really looked at the what-if scenario. What if something else, that's what you assume, actually happened? And that should help you size your exposure appropriately. And last but not least, be aware of correlation, and there are many correlations. So if I again think about the 25 years ago when people looked at risk, they looked at credit in isolation, market risk in isolation, in more recent years, operational risk in isolation. More recent risk types such as cyber risk in isolation are now being looked at more cross-risk types, is to look at how does a operational risk event actually affect your credit risk and actually leads to the before. Very important to understand those correlations. Okay? But fundamentally, taking risk is okay, but you need to make sure that you're getting paid for the risk. That is what my view is, and that you have to get paid for what you take. Okay, so I'm going to skip this in the interest of time, but just to reiterate what I said before, these are real situations. I have been involved in all of them. Some of them I've inherited from going into a new position, from leaving my previous job going into a new bank and sorting out the issues, so to speak, but all of these are first-hand experiences. Okay, I'm going to split this. I am going to try and make this an interactive session. Can you please raise your hand, ask questions? I'm going to ask you how would you do this transaction, and please don't be shy. And those with the most active and intelligent answers might get a prize from Luigi and his colleagues later on. That's a surprise of what kind of prize. Okay, so we're going to look at this first case study, which is an oil and gas company in Russia. Okay, so I'm going to give you the background of this transaction, and then I'm going to give you some few items under the transaction banner, and I'm going to ask you, how would you then look at this transaction given what you know now? I know that you are being given 10-15 minutes to think about something that I probably, or my colleagues at the time, took weeks to work on. Okay, but we're going to hopefully make this work. And please just throw up the answers and the thoughts that you have. Okay, so this company was a privatized oil producer with about 16 billion barrels of proven oil reserves in about 25 years. That's a lot, just to put it in context. It became Russia's largest oil exporter within 5 years of privatization. It was one of the largest global oil companies in the world, not in Russia, in the world, and was voted as one of the most transparent emerging markets counterparties or companies, and EM investors loved that company because it was transparent and they could pick up better yields than they could in the developed markets. The company was listed in Moscow and New York, so that means a certain level, ignoring Moscow for a minute, but to be listed in New York, it would require a certain level of governance, disclosure, transparency, so you could assume that the company had decent governance. It hired some very experienced international bankers and specialists in key roles to basically support that confidence in governance and how the company was run. It had its operations and plants, refineries were in remote regions of Russia. That is not unusual. Most of the gas reserves in Russia are actually in remote regions, in the Siberian region, and it had a very visible CEO, which from an investor perspective is a positive thing. The context of the environment is that at the time there was a newly elected president in Russia. So the transaction that we were asked to look at was a 1 billion pre-export finance facility. I would say, if you don't know what a pre-export finance facility is, it's basically the financing of export contracts that have already been agreed, signed, and are legally binding, but have not been executed, or the export has not happened yet, and the companies require or ask for pre-financing. It is plain vanilla, bread and butter banking. There's nothing special about this. It is done all over the world, has been done for many years, and will continue to be done for many years still. The bank was asked to sole underwrite the transaction. The bank was also the lead manager of the transaction. So the three questions that I want you to think about is, what would be the key due diligence considerations? What are the key structuring features that you think would be required to support such a transaction? And would you recommend, approve? And when I say recommend, because if you are the business guy bringing that deal, remember the 3 line of defense, you have to recommend the transaction. That means you own the risk. And if you're the risk manager, you would approve or decline the transaction. So, what are the key due diligence considerations that you think you would ask for? Don't be shy, remember?
Most, I would ask, first and foremost, what level of security we have and how many liens there are on the, I guess, $1 billion. How many barrels of oil am I secured against, and what the volatility of oil price is, so I know my 95% and 5% max and min on my collateral.
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, absolutely. What other questions would you ask? What other due diligence?
Information on the buyer, so I don't know who it's being exported to, but who's buying it and what, I guess, their history with producing oil purchases.
Yeah, and what the type of contracts that they've signed.
Like if they've had credit problems paying for other imports.
Yeah, absolutely. What else?
I would also say the jurisdiction risk, since it is dealing with Russia, with the implication of the defense.
By the way, let me say, all of these cases that we will say, I'm not biased towards any or against any other country, they just happen to be. Okay. Actually, in the next few sessions, we will also talk about the US, so not just the EU that are bad guys sometimes. Yes, absolutely right. Anything else?
So just ask what, since it is Russia and the company sounds very similar to the one we already know called UCAS, I would ask.
I was going to say, can we disqualify him?
Like retroactively, of course, it is reasonable to.
Okay, don't tell the answer. Don't tell the answer yet, okay? I know you know what happened. Okay.
What are the political risks and what is the dynamic in the governing structure? Are there any people in the board of directors or in the among managers coming from a new team of the president?
Yep, absolutely. Political risk, given what the country involved is very good. Anything else? Okay, so then if you think about the transactions, so you've established the contracts, you've established the reserves, you've established the amount of oil that is being pledged, you've established the contracts of the exports, you've established your political risk. So what do you think is important in terms of structuring? What are the important structuring features you would ask in the transaction? So you've got your reserve, you've established what they have, you've got the contracts. What would you ask for?
A fraction of the reserves as collateral.
Yes, but imagine you're the Russian government. Do you think you're going to give your oil reserves as collateral?
If you need the financing, I would think you have to.
But you're not giving the financing to the Russian government, are you? You're giving it to a private company.
Theoretically, yes.
Good answer. Yep. But your thinking is correct. Yeah.
Alternatively, as collateral, the bank could ask for the physical assets of the private company instead of government assets the private companies can actually own.
Yes, absolutely. The assets, very important. Yep, we'll come to this when we discuss what happened. Yeah.
See how similar Russian deals price and how similar oil deals price.
Yeah, so as it happens, this was the first private sort of deal, but absolutely, and what we looked at was the proxy to the Russian government and others, but yes, you're absolutely right, the pricing, similar transactions are very important.
Maybe like some kind of agreement as to what would happen if the price of oil changes dramatically between now and when the transaction takes place.
Yeah, very good. Material adverse change, that is called. Yes, absolutely.
Could you bring in another bank to help you lever yourself, whether it's Russian or American?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. That's very good. Very, very good. Okay. Now, would you recommend the transaction, and would you, if you were the business person bringing this deal to, I'm your credit officer, would you recommend the transaction to be done based on what you know today? The gentleman in the middle there is not to answer whether he would recommend it. But would you recommend this deal to be done with what you have? Assuming we make the returns, assuming everything that you know, everything being equal, would you do the deal? Would you approve the deal? Who would approve? Who of you would approve? Who would? So put your hand up if you would approve the deal. Wow, only 5 of you, 6 of you, my God. Well, maybe we have some good bankers, future bankers in the room. So,
They're not going to make any business.
so let me tell you what actually went wrong, or what happened with this transaction. So this transaction, this was a Deutsche Bank transaction. It was, I can't say we anymore, but Deutsche Bank was a very large player in Russia. And this was the first big private company deal that came through to the market, and we wanted to do this deal. And what I asked for as a structure was everything. You guys picked up on everything: the collateral, the bank de-risking upfront. So we would go to the client and say we'll underwrite, but in the back we would get 2 other sub-underwriters so that we would distribute the risk before it actually hit our books. We asked for the collateral pledge on the contracts, not on the reserves. We did look at that, but the reserves are national property, if you want, so they could not pledge it. But all the contracts of the exporting contracts were pledged to us. As it happens, they were all, well, there were many, but we chose the BP, the Shells, the Exxons, and the like. We also added something which was very important, was we asked for all the cash that was being generated through the export contracts to be routed through our bank. So we opened an account, so this was very specific to this transaction, which had not been with similar structures. Which I asked for was for the company to open an account with Deutsche Bank, and the proceeds of the exports would then be routed through Deutsche Bank before going to Russia, because we would then take whenever we had a coupon payment or principal repayment, it would come to us before then anything that was left would then go back to Russia. Okay? So what went wrong? Okay, so UCOS, that was the company, as you already knew and mentioned. So UCOS was privatized in 1996, and the privatization was extremely conflicted. And that was something we didn't really look at, or we looked at. Excuse me. We looked at, we knew about it, but we did not think it would be a problem. So it was privatized through a conflicted auction, and a bank called Bank Menatep actually won the auction, and it paid $300 million for assets that were worth probably about $5 billion at the time, not today, at the time. The Bank Menatep was owned by an oligarch called Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who I'm sure you will hear of in the session in November, who was the owner, chairman, and chief executive of Bank Menatep, and he actually also became then the CEO of UCOS. And I will give you just very briefly something behind these oligarchs, which should have been something we should have paid more attention to. We did pay attention to, we didn't pay enough attention for a reason I'll mention in a minute. But the oligarchs, for those of you who don't know, were very influential in terms of politics in the 1990s, and had many connections. And this is my own view. Please don't repeat that Rose said this or that, because I've already had a lot of issues with being associated with UCOS. They were linked to organized crime, they were linked to all sorts of dodgy things, and they flourished really a lot in the 90s, okay? The privatization of 96 was what was famously called as loans for shares deals. This was primarily to fund Yeltsin's political campaign at the time, and the view was that if these guys, these oligarchs funded his campaign. He would give them these shares in these strategic assets for very cheap, and that they would be able to keep them. So there's seven, an interesting parenthesis is that there were 7 original oligarchs. I think there's only 2 still around. All the others have either been, well, all the others are either dead, or they have, something has happened to them, but, or they've been sent to jail, as Michael Khodorkovsky actually happened. And the assets that were auctioned in '96 included things like Norilsk Nickel, Lukoil, Sibnef. I mean, big assets that today are major companies still in Russia and in the international market. So as I said, it was through a conflicted. He was one of the 7 oligarchs who acquired these privatized assets, and effectively they controlled Yeltsin. So in those days, I was going to Moscow a lot. Nearly every other week I was in Moscow. And we knew that something was going to happen when we saw these rows of cars going into the Kremlin. We knew something was going to happen. Because it was these, if the press reported that the oligarchs were going to see the president, we knew something was going to happen. In '99, as you know, Putin was elected. This is also in the press, he basically told these 7 oligarchs, I will allow you to keep those controversial assets, but on one condition, is that you stay out of politics and you don't meddle with me, because Yeltsin was a complete puppet from these 7 guys. In the year 2000, Khodorkovsky had so much money, he was, I don't know, in Forbes, he was ranked as like in the top 20 richest men or something like that. He became a very big, vocal, political person, and he was very much advocating for international cooperation, Russian reform, and so on. He was warned a few times to keep quiet, but he's top 16th he had put down. And by that time, by the way, UCOS was flourishing. Okay, I mean, it was a really brilliant company. In 2003, Michael Khodorkovsky, business partner, Platon Ledbedev, was arrested for tax evasion. He was coming back from a trip somewhere, and his plane touched down in private airport in Moscow, and they arrested him. Not much explanation, and he did get a 10-year sentence. And I remember at the time, we had already agreed the underwriting. We had not funded the transaction, but all the structure that we talked about was done and agreed. And my boss, who was the chief risk officer of Deutsche Bank at the time, came to me and he said to me, are you sure we are going ahead with this transaction? It's not funded, and we could walk away. We've got material adverse change. The CF, I mean, this was a major executive in the company. We could claim material adverse change. In particular, the money had not gone yet. And I said to him, no, we can go forward. I was absolutely convinced that this company was bigger than Putin or Khodorkovsky or whoever. My view was that it was listed in the US, they had US shareholders, nothing would happen. A few months later, Khodorkovsky got arrested. We had just funded. We had funded about 2 weeks before that, and as we all know, he received a 10-year prison sentence. A little bit after his arrest, UCOS received a 27 billion bill for unpaid taxes. Don't know how they came up with the 27 billion. I can tell you I tried many times to figure out. It was not just to figure out because they know how they did. They probably put their finger up in the air and came up with a number. The company eventually was bankrupted in 2006. Now the loan, interestingly, remained current, and it remained current for one reason only, because the oil contracts that they were selling to Shell, BP, Exxon, and so on, continued to flow. The oil never stopped, and therefore the cash was continuing to come through the account. Until the company then was taken by the government and given to Rosneft, the national oil company, and this is an absolute true story. I then went to meet with the CEO of Rosneft, and I said to him that we need to sort out this situation. There's been a material adverse change in the company. We want the loan repaid. There was too much political risk around it. We were the leader rangers, therefore we were facing all these conversations. And the CEO said to me, no, we are not going to do anything. And because I had all the assets, somebody mentioned about pledging the assets, I've taken all their refineries as collateral. So all the refineries in northern Russia, I had nice documents as per English law, all were mine. I think I was in Moscow every week by then. I was back and forth with London. He said to me, I will settle with you if you take a haircut. And I said, I'm not going to take any haircut because I'm a banker, I need money, I work with money, you're an oil man, I have the refineries, you need the refineries, I don't need the refineries. So you're going to pay me 100%, and I'm even thinking maybe I'm going to ask you for a premium because you need my refineries, they are mine. Of course I didn't think they were mine because I can't go and take anything in Russia. At which point the CEO said to me, you do know I know where you live, where your children go to school, and that your husband takes your children to school. And I was like, well, okay. Nevertheless, I still need the money that the bank has lent to you, so please can I have the money back? A week later, he stopped all the oil flow going through the account. So he basically changed the contracts, and obviously whether it is Exxon, BP, Shell, they don't particularly care. They do not want to meddle into what's happening in Russia. They just care that oil is coming. They basically got new contracts. The contracts that were pledged to us under this transaction stopped, and there was no more payments coming. And what we did is we went to the London Court of Arbitration, and if you go online and look for UCOS, you will see that UCOS, the Russian government actually lost the case, and we won the case based on material adverse change, and it was actually the first time that such a case had been won just on material adverse change, which can be just very subjective. So there's many things that went wrong, many scary moments, I can assure you. My house was bugged, my telephone was bugged. The bank had to send, and that was just me, I mean there was many other people. It was actually quite a very, very difficult time for the people involved personally, but also for the bank. So what did we learn from this? First of all, in politics to politicians, is once there was some political interference with this company, we should have just walked away. It was not worth the money that we were making. It was not worth being in the press about being the first bank that was making the first private deal in Russia. It just was not worth it. It took us the good part of 2 years to get our money back, and many, many scary moments.
So did you get all the money back in the end?
Yeah, 100%. Money may well be a substitute for power, but it is not true power. So what did these oligarchs do? If any of you are interested, and maybe after the November talk you might be even more interested, there's a brilliant book called The Sale of the Century about this loan per share. It is absolutely fascinating to read about the privatization of '96 in Russia, and it will teach you many lessons. I mean, it is a fascinating book. It's not very big. It is really well written. The rise in oil prices increased Khodorkovsky's and other oligarchs who had also other oil companies to very dangerous level. These guys thought that they were too powerful. They thought that they were invincible. I think, again, this is my personal view, that I think that Putin absolutely had his agenda to say, I am going to show you, like he does still today, sorry, personal view, is that I'm going to show you who's in charge, and it is me. And it was not very, very pretty. The change in governments always bring heightened and very often not visible risks. I think this is something we can even say for the US at the moment. Sorry, again, my own view. And as I said, the new president was determined to assert power over the oligarchs who had held all the power through Yeltsin before.
Roselyne?
Sure.
I
Sorry.
heard the sorry, after the first, I guess when it looked like that Krukowski fellow was in trouble, did you have the opportunity to reprice the loan before it funded? And if you did or did not, like why didn't you? Because at that point, I guess you have to price in the political risk even if you didn't do so prior.
No, so we did look at it, actually, very good question. We did look at it. We could not because the loan was already, it was very well priced because we had already taken into account the political risk involved. We just didn't see it coming that far. And when the first guy was arrested, pat on the dead, he was a key guy in the company, but he wasn't the CEO. By the time the CEO had actually was arrested, the money was out of the bank.
When they stopped the oil flow, how many coupons had been delivered already at that point?
So they had already paid 2 coupons.
Still not much.
Yeah, but my principal is out there. I've got $1 billion.
Oh, right, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. And another bit of lesson in that is that maybe having an amortizing loan would have been far better because you would have been able to get part of your principal back. Sorry, I wasn't looking up. So anybody else has got questions or comments?
What was the haircut offered? What was the haircut that it was demanded?
From Roselyne, what they wanted to buy, well, his first offer was a 20% haircut. Yeah, it wasn't going to happen. Well, maybe it would have happened, I don't know, okay, but we were very, very firm that we felt we had, we were in our right not to take a haircut. And I think one of the things I don't put in this slide, but I think it's something which is very important, is understanding the cultural nuances of the different countries, counterparties you work with. I think is very important. My experience, and that's my personal view of working, I've worked with Russia since 1992, I guess, is the tougher you are, the more you stand your ground, the more respect you have, the more chance you have of getting your money back. The minute you say, okay, sure, I'll take a 20% haircut, you probably get 50 if you're lucky. So, yeah. So country risk is absolutely real. The ability to change laws. Governments do what they want to do, when they want to do. Emerging markets, non-emerging markets, maybe a little bit more difficult. We can see this in Brexit, what the UK government tries to do, but nevertheless, they will try to do it. Country risk is real. As I said, politicians will do what they want, when they want. Okay, so that was my first case. Let me see if there's anybody who's got comments, questions, or anything. Yeah.
I have a question. How would you think about pricing the country risk, especially in the emerging market?
So the country risk pricing, I always look at where CDS is trading. So your client does not like that because they say CDS is basically a view of traders making markets, right? I mean, making a P&L as opposed to real risk. I always think that it is absolutely where the real risk is, the risk premium, I should say. And so I would always look at where the proxy CDS is trading, and I need, depending on what your strategy is, but in a deal like the one we've just talked about, you need to distribute the risk. You need to do the deal. You need to make a profit for your own bank, and you need to be able to have a spread that is enough to entice your other counterparties to come in the deal. Therefore, looking at where the market is, adding a little bit of premium because it's first time in the market, maybe it's unknown asset class, unknown client, but my departure point is always CDS. Where is the CDS trading? And if they don't have a CDS, is look at the proxy CDS, which is always the sovereign. Yeah? Sure.
I have a curiosity. I was wondering whether there was any international attention on this topic, and whether it helped in any way to recover the debt. Like if you had political pressure also on the international side to get the credit back, and if the media talked about what was Putin doing, like
Yeah.
how the issue was addressed internationally.
The media talked about it, and if you go on Google, you'll see a lot of articles, but there was no pressure from any government back to Russia to say, so it was us, German, so the German government, but Deutsche Bank, the two other banks that underwrote with us were the French bank, Société Générale, and ING Bank. And they also went to their respective governments, and the government said, yeah, we'll make some comments, but you got to remember, Europe is something like 30 or 40% dependent on Russia for its energy. So it's not making a lot of noise. And I will tell you that in the sub-underwriting group, there were some American banks, and the American banks sold out very, very quickly. We picked up their share. They just did not, and I found that interesting because on the one hand, they were quick to react. They sold to us with a 40% discount. We picked it up. I still thought that we would recover 100%, but they didn't want to deal with any of that political risk or anything. They just thought, this is not for us. We went out. The European banks stuck in it. It was quite interesting to see how the different sort of countries behave.
And when you evaluate political risk, do you factor in these aspects, like the fact that when you're dealing with Russia, you're never going to have a political support, for example, because it's like a country with, like, do you price this kind of?
Absolutely, and also you price the fact that, we talked about the collateral, we took the assets, we took the reserves, we had everything. The reality is if you have to go and enforce, you have to go to Russia. Even if when we got a result in the UK courts on the arbitration, if the Russian government had decided not to pay us, we would have had to go to Moscow to enforce. There is not a chance in hell that I could go and say I'm going to enforce and take your refineries. They would stop me. I would not even make it through immigration.
So what did they pay?
I think that they did not want to be seen as defaulting on a UK court order. The UK court order, we didn't know whether we would won. It was the first time a material adverse change is simply the view that something material has changed. It's a judgment. It's not a fact. What is material adverse? What could be a change which is material to me? You might look at it and think, I don't think it's material at the end of the day. What they were arguing was the fact that they may have removed the CEO, they may have taken the company is still working. The oil is still there, the oil is still flowing. But the UK courts agreed with us.
We have a question here. So if yours is on the same topic, then mine is a little bit more general question about the CDS. So if you want.
Yeah, sure. So where would you say that in a case like this that ended up being extremely illegal in the end, like the business of banking stops and the legality starts, and like how closely do you work with lawyers, the legal team, and like what is that interaction like?
From day one. So there is, it is completely seamless because if we agree a deal with a client, whatever is agreed, I'm relying on the lawyers to make sure that whatever we've agreed is reflected in the document, but also whatever we're discussing or eventually agreeing with the client is something that is protecting us, really. Or I'm also relying on the lawyer to be telling me, you should be thinking about something else because the law here really is not going to play for you if something did go wrong. So it's not about finding everything that could go wrong, because a lot of things could go wrong. It's about understanding what could go wrong, being prepared for it, risk will be there. And how do you try and mitigate the risk? And the lawyers are absolutely part of that mitigation thought process.
So this is a more general question. If you want to defer and get in a second, we can talk about it afterwards as well. But one thing that I struggle with is when you were saying, you start out with the CDS and then you go to a proxy and that tends to be the sovereign. When I think about this, I often find that the sovereign is not a particularly good fit for a lot of the business deals and the business risk. So to give you an example, if you think about, say, a company that you're lending to, say, in Argentina at the moment, if you take the sovereign, there's going to be a substantial currency risk in the sovereign. But if you're dealing with a business that has an export backstop, and either the inputs and potentially and the outputs are traded in US dollars, there is no currency risk in that deal potentially, even though there's lots of country elements of political risk. But you would say that owning a sovereign bond is very different from, say, owning a share in a polyethylene producer in Argentina, for instance, that's using natural gas and so on. So how do you think about, in that case, parceling out what is relevant political risk and what really isn't relevant, the currency, for instance?
So, I mean, I think that it absolutely is, there's very big correlation in my mind. Yes, it's two different businesses and, two different types of risk to look at. But the country risk is absolutely relevant for your company, because while they may be able to pay their dollars and all this sort of stuff, if the Argentinian government does not want them to pay the dollars out, they will not be able to pay. And I've had Repsol own the big Argentinian oil company, and we dealt with them because we thought Repsol is a Spanish, important company in terms of the country economics and so on. The Argentinian government absolutely stopped it from paying dollars out. I can give you so many examples in emerging markets where we deal with, or bankers lend to counterparties who've got dollar flow because of exactly the point you just made, but are unable to pay, not because they don't have the dollars to pay, but because the central bank is not making dollars available for them or is blocking them from taking the dollars out. So the country risk is absolutely there. So it is not, you're right, there's a difference, but to use the sovereign as a proxy, and it will always be a bit more expensive. In some countries, some traders will argue that some companies should be a better price than the sovereign because of the case that you've made. As the lender, as the guy who wants the money back, as a risk officer, I always say, if the government does not want them to take the dollar out, they would put that barrier down. And that's the key to do. Okay? Oh my God, it's 1:45. Right, okay, so I have to let you guys out on time. So, sorry. So, we're going to try and go through this one a little bit quicker, actually. So, actually, I'm going to skip this one. It's very similar to the one that we've talked about, but it was in Mongolia. So it's a little bit... I can share the slides with them afterwards.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
if people want to send me questions and so on, I'm very happy. And I'm happy for those of you who can stay behind afterwards, but don't miss your classes. I'll get in trouble otherwise. Let's go to, I'm going to pick another Russia one, okay? And this was a real estate construction company, so I'm going to go quite quickly on this one. So we were awarded the mandate for a complete renovation of this Hotel Moskva, which is a landmark hotel, building in Moscow. Very strong support from the local authority. It was a 4 seasons franchise, high-profile project. The promoters included key decision makers in the city, including the mayor of Moscow, very important man in Moscow. And in 2004, the demolition of the old building started in order to redo the construction. And received $350 million from an unknown firm in the US who basically took a 51% equity stake. So we were asked to give $150 million 2-year stage construction loan, meaning as the construction goes on, you release the funds. As per milestone, we were given the full security package, which was actually the pledge of the building itself, the collateral itself, the construction itself. And we lent through a special purpose vehicle that was set up specially for the project. When you guys go into banking, you will see the setup of SPV is very standard. Most financings happen, especially for things like this, through a special purpose vehicle set up specifically for the debt. Right, so what do you think? Very, very quickly, 2 minutes. Who thinks, what are the key things you would think about, or key maybe red flags that you see in there?
Change of the mayor.
He's not allowed to answer anything. Yes?
First thought is you would want a neutral party to see if the milestones are achieved. Someone who can accurately measure the
Yeah,
milestones.
absolutely. Yeah. Anything else?
The unknown firm is kind of worrisome.
Say again?
The unknown firm.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I guess you want to have like, I'm sorry. You want to have like individual appraiser of the value of the property to match, to have a proper loan to value
Yes.
ratio. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. We'll do that.
Demand risk, you always have that kind of risk when you have an SPV in the middle.
Yes. So everything that you guys have picked up on everything, okay, that the structure would require, except one very key point, is who are these people that are coming in from this US entity? Who are behind these guys, really? And who is really the owner? Who is behind the SPV? Who is behind the borrower, okay? So I will tell you what happened, okay? So let me just say, would you do this deal or not? For those of you who've been in Moscow, it's the Four Seasons Hotel. It's beautiful, it's there. It's right in the middle of Red Square. It's fantastic, really nice place to stay in if you're going to Moscow. Who would do the deal? Or who would not do the deal? I think I may have spooked you from before. Right, I did do the deal. The deal worked like a dream. Okay, so the stage construction happened, no problem at all. Until 2005, the certificates from the city of Moscow stopped coming. So the stage construction, that there was oversight, our own independent appraiser, as you just said, but also the city put somebody in place to make sure that the milestones were reached as from a construction perspective as opposed to lending perspective. But their certificates stopped coming. By that time, we had probably dispersed, I would say, about 80%, 75%, 80% of the loan. The coupon payment stopped as the construction stopped. And in 2006, so 2 years after the loan was made, the loan went into default and we started to try and recover. The promoters, who we knew, the people that we thought were behind the deal, started to point the finger at each other. So we then went to do further due diligence because we had to find out who do we go to get our money. And I will cut to the chase and I will tell you who we found actually owned the the borrower behind the company who was borrowing. Was half of the company was owned actually by the city mayor himself. The remaining half was owned partly by Putin's judo instructor. Those of you who know Putin is really into his judo. The part of it was owned by his judo masseurs, and part of it was owned by somebody who worked in his household. So basically Putin. But none of this came through at all when we were looking at the transaction. And what happened was that what we found out was that the mayor of Moscow had fallen out with Putin in something completely unrelated. And the mayor of Moscow then basically decided to stop giving the construction permit in order to try and take the whole project himself. The mayor of Moscow was Lushkov, is no longer in Russia, by the way. But his wife has a house, has built a house not far from where we live in London, which is the biggest house in London after Buckingham Palace. So it gives you an idea. The only way we got our money back was, I had the pledge of the hotel. I had everything was pledged. I went to meet they sent a delegate, they said to me that a delegate will come and talk to me. And the delegate that they sent to talk to me was the Speaker of the House, I think in the US it would be the House of Representatives, so it was the Speaker of the Duma. And I was terrified of meeting this guy. I had no idea what I would expect. And I saw him coming out of his car, 10 cars coming to drop him at the Deutsche Bank offices to meet with me, and I saw him come out of the car, and he was not higher than this, and I thought, I can take this guy on. And, I did actually have a conversation with him, and I actually said to him, after half an hour of discussion and figuring out that all of this nonsense that was going on, I said to him, if I have to come and be the manager of your hotel and stop being a banker because I have to repossess your hotel, I will. Which of course I had no intention of, because I never could anyway. And he turned around to the CEO of the bank in Moscow and he told him in Russian, she's a tough lady, I pay her back. And I never believed he would do it. The next day the money was in our account. That is how we got paid back. But there are so many warning flags that we should have had in here that we actually should have said it. And by the way, all of the promoters, including the leader of the Duma, no longer in the country. The Duma leader is here in the US, and Lushkov is in London, as I said. And in 2014, the Four Seasons finally opened, and as I said, it's a fine hotel. It's very nice. And what did we learn? Appearance is not everything. We thought this was a flagship project. I went to visit the project. It was still just the shell of the old company. I remember going all the way to the roof, actually, open space at the roof, looking at the view of the Kremlins and the Red Square. I mean, it just looked fantastic. It just looked like a really important project. The city representatives have made to us how important this was to show a flagship hotel right in the center of Red Square. Understanding the ultimate beneficiaries behind the SPV, you can pick so many transactions and so many cases that went wrong in the dot-com bubble, in the financial crisis that happened in 2007, where if people had understood, and others, okay, where people had understood who is behind the SPV structures, the problems would not have happened. Political exposed people. Today, the bank regulators have very, very tough rules and due diligence that you need to do before you do business with any politically exposed people. There's no rules that say you can't do the business, but there's very clear rules in terms of what it is that you must do before you actually do business with them, and they're very stringent. And as I said, don't be fooled by the perceived charm or the project or the deal, because it's the first private deal in the country, because it is a fantastic project, because it looks fantastic does not mean it is fantastic. And don't rely on your collateral. Collateral is your last way out. Cash flow should always be your first way out. Too many times people rely on, oh, I've got the collateral, I've got something that I can go to, but your collateral is always your last way out. It is not, it's your fallback. It's not your cash flow. And I don't have time to go through the fourth one because I don't want to run over. So I'm going to stop here and ask whether people have got any comments or questions or views.
You mentioned using CDS, or whether it's single name or sovereign, as kind of like a proxy for how to price a deal. But it seems like in both the Russian cases, it's one thing to price risk of doing business in Russia, but it's really, in these cases, it seemed to hinge on single people and single entities and all that. So kind of to your point about risk mitigation, not elimination, how do you think about this nuanced level of risk? Because whatever loan you're going to take on is going to be very idiosyncratic in nature, and essentially you're betting on it. Even if you bet on the mayor or the prime minister staying in power, that's taking an election view, basically.
So you're absolutely right, and that is exactly the bet that you should not be taking. What we should have looked at is to say, this is the project, this is the construction risk. The construction risk to include not getting the construction permits and so on. The pricing should have reflected that, as opposed to just construction loans are richly priced anyway as a product. The nuance of it, as you say, is that would this loan be better, more richly priced than if we were lending a working capital facility to the Four Seasons in Moscow? Absolutely, because the risks are different. The issue here was not just the pricing. The pricing might have well been appropriate, but you're not getting your principal back in this case. So there are other considerations. I think if somebody had come to me and said, by the way, this SPV, who's our borrower, is owned by Putin and his merry men, I would have said, are you out of your effing mind? We're not going to do the deal because of exactly the risk that you just said. But that information never came to light. We never looked all the way back. And, one of the key lessons is to always understand who is behind your borrower, who is the ultimate beneficiary.
So the question is sort of related. So there are clear drawbacks of having people in power having a stake in the borrower. But I wonder, do you also consider the benefits of people in power being involved in the deal as a guarantees of the stability of the business, assuming that you know that the political system is stable in a particular country? So because it gives some protection from the politician itself. So if there is someone that has power, it can protect from the government pressure, in a sense.
So I think the answer is no, never. In emerging markets, it's a key. Sometimes people will say, would you not want to have exposure to a company where the government is influential or whatever because you might have protection? My answer is no. You have to rely on your cash flow. You have to rely on the business case of what the transaction is, your documentation, what is your way out, what is your structure. Because that guy who gave you if we had gone through the example of the Mongolian one, which is a copper mining company, Mongolia is I think it is the 5th largest copper reserves in the world. Very important copper exports. Only 2 copper companies in the country, and we dealt with one of them. And its fortunes changed literally overnight because the political guy changed. And we went to visit the political guys because we thought a country like Mongolia, you don't go easily to do business there. It is quite difficult jurisdiction. Unexpected elections, unexpected change in government, you don't need to go to emerging markets. You look at the steel company in the UK that was, the Conservative government agreed something with the owners, the Indian owners, the government, still Conservative government, but the leaders change, the view of how they're going to drive that completely changes again. So I think you really need to look at the business case and the cash flows.
So kind of related to the question that he was asking. So in some of the emerging markets, you will find assets that are implicitly backed by the government or the individual. So for example, like muni bonds in China, which is like not essentially a sovereign bond, but it's implicitly backed by the local as well as the central government. What's your view on these kind of implicit backing? Are you in favor of these? Are you very skeptical about these? What's your view?
Yes, so on the type of assets such as muni bonds, absolutely, and it goes again the same. What is the fundamental credit analysis? So I've looked at various muni bonds in China, and you need to look at where their revenues come, where their taxes, how do they collect, and all these sorts of stuff. Okay, but essentially, I don't believe that for a pure, straightforward bond, especially for the large cities and for countries that want to have very good standing in the capital markets, and for sure China wants to be there, the default likelihood is very low. However, if you're doing a derivative with a municipality, that's a very different ballgame. If you're doing a derivative, for example, and you have change of the people in the municipality at the council, at the city level, speculative transactions, that I do not like doing derivatives and this type of transaction at all with cities and munis, I have to be honest. They always end in tears.
I have a question. When you enter this kind of market where you cannot just rely on what you read on newspapers or whatever, how do you get the crucial information for your business? You hire consultants, you just have local experts, whatever? Because I mean,
No.
basically here you lack one important piece of information on the deal.
So definitely do not rely on the papers. You have to go do due diligence yourself. I mean, you know, when we lent money to Yukos or Gazprom, for example, was another one in Russia. I went to Siberia when I lent money to a gold company in South Africa. I was mentioning yesterday, I went down the gold shaft. I went to see how they're working. There's a famous story of, I won't say who the bank is, it's very unprofessional, but a Swiss bank who lent money to a tomato canning factory in Turkmenistan. And the day the loan went into default, they went to Turkmenistan and realized that there was never a canning company in Turkmenistan, and let alone tomatoes that they were growing. So if they had done that due diligence, they would not have done the deal. So no, we don't rely on just the papers. I mean, I think it is important to be close. As a risk manager, the staying behind a computer. So the job of a risk manager, if people think risk management is boring, is the front office guys, or the first line who go out and meet the client, it's not like that. You have to go meet the client yourself. You have to go find the information yourself. You have to go meet with, you know, I go and meet with central bankers, economists in the country and ask their views. I meet companies that have nothing to do with the deal that I'm doing. I ask questions about, are you investing in that country? Because these are signs for me whether they themselves are believing in their own country. Because if they don't, then why the hell should I? So you need to do that yourself. Last question, I think, otherwise I'm going to get in serious trouble.
I think this is a good transition. You mentioned that doing business with Russians, you should never back down, otherwise they see you as weak. Are there any other, negotiation strategies dealing with other cultures that you can share with us?
I don't know if I can answer that. Yes, of course there is, and it's figuring out as well, how you navigate, how you navigate the political landscape, because it always links back to the point that you're making earlier on. It will always link back to politically. The Argentinians are very, very difficult to deal with because they are not paying back is not an option. It's normal. I mean, it's like, what do you mean you want your money back? The fact that the currency is going to devalue by 30%, the minute you've lent a big chunk of dollars to the country, yeah, I mean, that will happen, that you can. So I think the way that I would answer this is that you have to understand the various cultures. And by the way, this applies to France, to the UK, to the US. It applies to every single country. We've talked about Russia again. I apologize to my Russian friends. Russia is very, very close to my heart, as my husband and family can tell you. I have many friends from Russia. It just happens to be a country that has gone through a lot of transition, and unfortunately, I think in my mind, despite its great capabilities, is going a little bit backwards at the moment. But each country has its own, has its own way of dealing. So if you go to a meeting, for example, I can tell you, if you go to a meeting with a big counterparty in France, you have to spend the first 15, 20 minutes talking about complete nonsense of the weather, the food, where you've been to dinner last night. I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I want to get to the point, right? I mean, but if you got to the point, not a good meeting. So understanding cultures and the diversity of the differences of each of them, very, very, very important. Whereas when I go to China, I like my meetings in China because they are bang. Let's go. Meeting. What is the deal? What do we want to do? What do we want to achieve? So it's just understanding that is very important. Anyway, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much. Please come my email. If anybody wants to ask me questions or whatever, I'm very happy to answer questions. But I think we have another session anyway on Tuesday, tomorrow. But in the meantime, if you've got anything, just drop me a mail. Okay? Thank you very much.